The autumn sun was already setting as Judge Anthony Wilson gathered his papers from the bench. The courtroom had emptied an hour ago, but he remained behind, reviewing notes for tomorrow's proceedings. At 52, with salt and pepper hair and eyes that carried both warmth and the weight of 2 decades making difficult decisions, Anthony had earned the respect of colleagues across the state. Tonight marked the end of a particularly draining day. A complex insurance fraud case with emotional testimony from victims who had lost their life savings. He stretched his back, feeling the tightness from sitting too long. The courthouse was quiet now, just the occasional echo of the night cleaning crew's footsteps in the marble hallway. Anthony checked his watch. 7:45 p.m. His wife would be wondering where he was. He hadn't meant to stay this late, but time had slipped away as it often did when he was absorbed in his work. "Calling it a night, Judge?" asked Renee, the courthouse security guard, as Anthony passed through the employee exit, finally heading home. "Tell that grandson of yours I expect to see his straight A's next time you bring him by," Anthony replied with a genuine smile. "Oh, he's working on it, sir. That math tutor you recommended has been a godsend." Anthony waved goodbye and stepped into the crisp October air. The parking garage was nearly empty, his footsteps echoing between concrete pillars as he walked to his car. 3 months ago, after driving the same reliable sedan for 12 years, he had finally treated himself to something special, a midnight blue luxury, satin with butter-soft leather seats in that new car, smell he found himself appreciating every time he opened the door. The car had been a small celebration, something to mark 20 years on the bench. His wife had teased him about finally acting like a judge with the purchase. He hadn't bought it to show off. That wasn't his style. But he couldn't deny the small thrill he felt each time he pressed the ignition button and heard the engine purr to life. Tonight, as he pulled out of the garage and onto the street, classical music filled the car. Brahms Symphony No. 4, his favorite for unwinding after a stressful day. The downtown streets were relatively quiet for a Thursday. Anthony loosened his tie as he drove, mentally transitioning from Judge Wilson to just Anthony, a man heading home to his family. He took the familiar route through downtown, past the city library and art museum, both buildings illuminated against the darkening sky. At the intersection by the old courthouse, the one built in 1923 that now housed county administrative offices, he stopped at a red light and checked his phone. A text from his wife. "Dinner in the oven. Drive safe." Anthony smiled and put his phone down as the light turned green. He'd been married for 28 years, and Karen still made sure he knew he was expected home safely each night. He drove through the light and turned onto Maple Avenue, which would take him through the Oakwood neighborhood before connecting to the highway toward home. Oakwood had changed over the years. Once a struggling area with boarded-up storefronts, it had seen an influx of new businesses and renovated homes. Anthony had mixed feelings about the gentrification, glad for the economic development but concerned about the longtime residents who could no longer afford to stay. His courtroom had seen too many eviction cases from this area over the past few years. As he drove past the new artisanal coffee shop that had replaced the corner grocery store, Anthony noticed headlights in his rearview mirror. A police cruiser had pulled up behind him at the stop sign. Nothing unusual about that. Police patrolled this neighborhood regularly. He continued driving, maintaining exactly the speed limit as he always did. The cruiser stayed behind him through the next 2 turns. Anthony felt a slight tightening in his chest, an old familiar feeling. Even as a judge, even in his expensive car and tailored suit, that feeling never quite went away. He checked his speedometer again. Exactly 30 miles per hour in the 30 zone. His brake lights were working. He'd just had the car serviced last week. His license tabs were current. When the blue and red lights flashed behind him, Anthony wasn't entirely surprised. He took a deep breath and guided his car to the curb, positioning it carefully. He turned down the music and rolled down his window halfway. Years of hearing testimony from both officers and defendants had taught him exactly what to do during a traffic stop. Hands visible on the steering wheel. Engine off. Interior light on, so the officer could see clearly inside the vehicle. He watched in the side mirror as the officer approached. Young white man, probably mid-30s with a military-style haircut and broad shoulders that strained against his uniform. The officer's hand rested casually near his holster. Standard procedure. Anthony knew, but it still made his heart beat a little faster. "Good evening, officer," Anthony said calmly as the officer reached the window, his voice carrying the measured tones he used in his courtroom. The officer didn't immediately respond. He shined his flashlight around the interior of the car, then directly into Anthony's face. The judge squinted against the bright light but maintained his composed expression. "Do you know why I stopped you tonight?" the officer finally asked, his voice carrying a slight edge. "No, sir, I don't," Anthony replied. Maintaining the respectful tone he'd learned long ago was essential in these situations, no matter who you were. The officer's flashlight beam moved slowly across the dashboard, lingering on the luxury car's emblem. "This your vehicle?" the officer asked, emphasizing the word "your" in a way that made Anthony's jaw tighten slightly. "Yes, officer, it is. How long have you had it?" Anthony paused, finding the question odd. "About 3 months now." "Is there a problem?" The officer stepped back slightly, his flashlight beam moving to illuminate the license plate. "We've had reports of a stolen vehicle matching this description in the area. I'm going to need to see your license, registration, and proof of insurance." Anthony felt a familiar heaviness settle in his stomach. 20 years as a judge, a law degree from an Ivy League university, a house in the most expensive suburb of the city, and still, this. He reached slowly toward the glove compartment. "I'm getting my registration and insurance from the glove box," he narrated his movements clearly. "My wallet with my driver's license is in my inside jacket pocket." The officer nodded, watching every movement with careful eyes. As Anthony opened the glove compartment, he could see the reflection of another car slowing down as it passed. A couple inside, peering curiously at the scene, a black man in an expensive car being questioned by a white officer. An old, familiar scene playing out yet again. The car's interior light illuminated the contents of the glove compartment, neatly organized insurance and registration documents, the owner's manual, a small flashlight, and a pair of driving gloves his daughter had given him last Christmas. Anthony carefully extracted the insurance card and registration, then, with deliberate movements, reached for his wallet. "Here you are, officer," he said, handing over the documents. The officer studied the license first, then the registration. His eyebrows rose slightly as he read. "Judge Wilson?" he asked, a note of disbelief in his voice. "Yes," Anthony replied simply. The officer looked from the license to Anthony's face and back again. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite embarrassment, but a recalibration. "You're coming from the downtown courthouse?" the officer asked, his tone noticeably different now. "Yes, I had a long day in court. Heading home now." Anthony maintained his calm, giving away nothing of the emotions churning inside him. The anger, the weariness, the resignation that this was still happening, would always happen, no matter his title or achievements. The officer seemed to be considering something. In the distance, Anthony could hear sirens, unrelated to this stop probably, but they added to the tension of the moment. A few more cars had driven by, slowing as they passed the scene. One had even pulled over about 50 yards ahead, its hazard lights blinking. "Is there something wrong with my registration?" Anthony asked after the silence had stretched uncomfortably long. The officer handed the documents back. "No, sir. Everything appears to be in order." He paused, then added, "We had a report of a stolen vehicle, same make and model, similar color, just doing due diligence." Anthony nodded, accepting the explanation without comment. He'd heard variations of it before, in his youth and as a young attorney, though less frequently since he'd taken the bench. Still, he knew what had really happened here. It wasn't about the car's make and model. "Am I free to go, officer?" he asked, his voice steady. Before the officer could answer, the car that had pulled ahead with its hazards on reversed slowly until it was alongside Anthony's vehicle. The window rolled down, revealing the face of Dr. Thompson, a well-known surgeon who lived in the neighborhood and had appeared in Anthony's courtroom as an expert witness several times. "Everything all right, Judge Wilson?" Dr. Thompson called out, his concerned expression visible even in the dimming light. And just like that, the dynamic shifted completely. The officer's posture stiffened at the interruption. He turned toward Dr. Thompson's car, his hand still resting near his holster. "Sir, please continue driving. This is a traffic stop." Dr. Thompson didn't move his car. "I recognize Judge Wilson from his courtroom. Is there a problem here?" Anthony felt the delicate balance of the situation shift. He appreciated the doctor's concern but worried the intervention might escalate things. The last thing he wanted was for two professional black men to end up in a confrontation with law enforcement on a darkening street corner. "It's fine. Dr. Thompson," Anthony called out, his voice calm but firm. "Just a routine check. Please go on ahead." The surgeon hesitated, clearly conflicted, but finally nodded. "If you're sure, Judge." He gave the officer a long look before rolling up his window and driving away slowly, his hazard lights blinking twice more before turning off. The officer watched the car go, then turned back to Anthony. Something had changed in his expression, a flicker of uncertainty, perhaps even embarrassment, quickly replaced by a hardened professionalism. "Step out of the vehicle, please," he said. Anthony's heart sank. He had hoped the encounter was winding down, not escalating. "May I ask why, officer?" "I need to verify some information." "Please step out of the vehicle." 20 years on the bench had taught Anthony to recognize when arguing would only make things worse. With deliberate movements, he unfastened his seatbelt, opened the door, and stepped onto the pavement. The evening air felt cooler now, or perhaps it was just the chill of the situation. He stood straight, his 6-foot frame dignified in his charcoal suit despite the late hour and his growing weariness. "Officer." Anthony glanced at the nameplate on the uniform. "Ott Brennan, I've provided my identification and registration. They confirm I'm the owner of this vehicle. What further information do you need to verify?" Officer Brennan didn't answer immediately. Instead, he spoke into the radio on his shoulder. "Dispatch, I need a registration check on a blue sedan license plate." He recited Anthony's plate number. Anthony suppressed a sigh. This was no longer about a traffic violation, if it ever had been. This was about power and perception. A black man in an expensive car in a neighborhood undergoing gentrification. A story as old as time, just with different characters. A small gathering of onlookers had formed on the sidewalk across the street. 3 people now, watching with the wary interest of those who know history and recognize its patterns. Anthony felt their eyes on him, felt the weight of representing something larger than himself in this moment. "Sir, when did you purchase this vehicle?" Officer Brennan asked, his tone suggesting he was building a case. 3 months ago, as I mentioned earlier. I have the bill of sale in my briefcase in the trunk if you'd like to see it." "And where did you purchase it?" "At the downtown dealership on River Street. Paid for it in full." Anthony kept his voice level, fighting back the urge to mention that he could afford 3 such cars if he wanted, that he had worked his entire life to earn what he had. Such statements wouldn't help now. Officer Brennan's radio crackled. "Unit 317, registration for that vehicle shows registered to an Anthony Wilson, 145 Highland Drive." The dispatcher's voice was tinny but clear in the evening air. "Can you run the name?" Brennan asked. Anthony almost laughed. They were running his name as if he were a suspect, as if his identity needed verification beyond the judge's ID card he carried. More people had gathered now. A woman with grocery bags had stopped on her way home. 2 young men on bicycles watched from the corner. An elderly couple stood in front of their renovated brownstone, whispering to each other. The scene was collecting witnesses like a rolling snowball. The radio crackled again. "Anthony Wilson, DOB 517, 1973. No wants, no warrants." There was a pause. "Note, subject is listed as a circuit court judge for the county." Something flickered across Officer Brennan's face. Surprise, disbelief, or perhaps the first real inkling that he had miscalculated. But his expression quickly hardened again. "Sir, we've had reports of several high-end vehicles being stolen in this area. Your car matches the description of one reported missing yesterday." Anthony crossed his arms, his patience wearing thin despite his better judgment. "Officer Brennan, my car is 3 months old. The registration confirms I own it. Your dispatcher just confirmed my identity." "What exactly is happening here?" A second police car pulled up behind Officer Brennan's cruiser, its lights spinning but its siren silent. Anthony felt his heart sink further. Either Brennan had called for backup, or the growing crowd of onlookers had attracted attention. The door of the second cruiser opened, and a heavy-set officer with sergeant stripes emerged. He approached with the unhurried gait of someone who had seen it all before. "What's the situation, Brennan?" the sergeant asked, his eyes moving between the officer and Anthony. "Possible stolen vehicle report. Sergeant Clark. Subject claims to be Judge Wilson." Anthony nearly flinched at the word claims. but kept his expression neutral. Sergeant Clark looked at Anthony more carefully now. Recognition dawned in his eyes. "Judge Wilson? From the Third Circuit Court?" "Yes, Sergeant," Anthony replied, allowing a hint of relief to enter his voice. "Officer Brennan stopped me regarding a stolen vehicle report. I've provided my identification and registration showing I'm the rightful owner." Clark's expression shifted to one of concern. "I see." He turned to Officer Brennan. "Can I see the documents, please?" Brennan handed over Anthony's license and registration. The sergeant reviewed them quickly, then returned them to Anthony with a respectful nod. "I apologize for the inconvenience. Your Honor, we did have a report of a stolen vehicle, but—" He glanced meaningfully at the license plate. Not this one. The implication hung in the air between them. There had been no stolen vehicle matching Anthony's make and model. Or if there had been, it wasn't what had prompted this stop. The crowd across the street had grown to about a dozen people now. Someone was filming with a phone. Anthony was acutely aware of how this looked, how it would be perceived, the conversations it would spark. He was also aware of his position, his responsibility, and the delicate balance required in this moment. "Sergeant Clark," Anthony said, his voice quiet but carrying the authority he used in his courtroom. "I understand officers have difficult jobs and must investigate suspicious circumstances. However, I've been stopped without cause, ordered out of my vehicle without explanation, and had my identity questioned, despite clear documentation." Clark had the decency to look uncomfortable. "Yes, sir. I understand your concerns." Officer Brennan stood rigid, his face unreadable. Anthony could almost see the young man's thoughts racing, calculating the potential consequences of this encounter. "I'd like your badge numbers, please," Anthony said. "Both of you." The sergeant provided his immediately. Brennan hesitated before reciting his. Anthony committed both to memory. "Thank you. Am I free to go now?" "Yes, sir," Sergeant Clark said. "Again, I apologize for the inconvenience." As Anthony returned to his car, he heard the sergeant speaking quietly but firmly to Officer Brennan. The words weren't clear, but the tone was unmistakable, a reprimand, a warning. The crowd began to disperse as Anthony sat in his driver's seat. He didn't start the engine immediately. Instead, he took several deep breaths, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. The adrenaline that had been sustaining him began to ebb, leaving him feeling drained. His phone buzzed. A text from his wife. "Everything okay? You're usually home by now." How to answer that? Was everything okay? No, not really. But it was over, at least for tonight. He typed back, "On my way home. Had a situation. I'll explain when I get there." As he put his phone down and started the engine, he noticed Dr. Thompson's car parked about a block away. The doctor had been watching the whole time, ready to intervene if needed. Anthony gave him a small nod of appreciation as he drove past. The classical music resumed when he started the car, the familiar Brahms symphony continuing as if nothing had happened. But everything had changed. As a judge, Anthony knew that what had just occurred wasn't just a misunderstanding or an overzealous officer. It was a symptom of something deeper, something systemic. The question now was what he would do about it. As he drove through the remainder of Oakwood toward the highway that would take him home, Anthony's mind was already working, formulating not just a complaint but a plan. 20 years on the bench had taught him that justice wasn't just about punishing wrongdoing, it was about creating change. And perhaps this incident, however painful, could be the catalyst for something important. The city lights faded behind him as he hit the open highway. The road ahead clear, but the path forward anything but simple. The kitchen lights were still on when Anthony pulled into his driveway. It was nearly 9:30 now, almost 2 hours after he'd planned to be home. As he turned off the engine, he sat for a moment in the quiet car, collecting himself. His wife didn't need to see how shaken he truly was. The front door opened before he reached it. Karen stood in the doorway, concern etched on her face. After 28 years of marriage, she could read him like one of the law books lining his study. "What happened?" she asked, stepping aside to let him in. Anthony set his briefcase down and loosened his tie. "I was stopped by the police on the way home." Karen's expression shifted from concern to understanding. She didn't need more explanation. They'd had variations of this conversation before, though not recently and not since he'd become a judge. "Are you okay?" she asked, her hand resting on his arm. "I'm fine," he said automatically, then corrected himself. Actually, no. I'm angry, and I'm tired of being angry about the same thing decades later. They moved to the kitchen where a plate of food waited in the microwave. Anthony wasn't hungry anymore, but he knew Karen had prepared the meal with care. So he sat at the island counter while she heated it. Tell me everything, she said, placing a glass of water in front of him. As the microwave hummed, Anthony recounted the stop, the questioning, the arrival of Sergeant Clark, and the eventual resolution. Karen listened without interrupting, though her expression darkened as the story unfolded. What are you going to do? She asked when he finished. Anthony took a sip of water. I'm not sure yet, but I know I have to do something. This isn't just about me. The microwave beeped. Karen set the plate in front of him, roast chicken, potatoes, and green beans that would have been delicious 2 hours ago. Anthony took a few bites, more out of obligation than hunger. The boys need to know about this, Karen said, referring to their 2 sons, one a medical resident in Chicago, the other finishing law school in Washington, D.C. Anthony nodded. I'll call them tomorrow. He paused, fork midway to his mouth. This is exactly what we warned them about growing up. All those talks about how to behave during traffic stops, how to keep their hands visible, how to speak respectfully even when treated disrespectfully. The anger rose in his voice. I did everything right tonight. Everything we taught them. And I still ended up standing on the side of the road being questioned about my own car. Karen reached across the counter and squeezed his hand. But you came home safely. That's what matters most. They both knew she was right, but they also knew it wasn't enough. Coming home safely shouldn't be the bar for success in a routine traffic stop. After dinner, Anthony retreated to his study. The room had always been his sanctuary, walls lined with law books and family photos, his degrees hanging beside pictures of his sons at graduation. Tonight, though, the space felt different, as if the outside world had invaded it. He sat at his desk and opened his laptop. For a moment, his finger hovered over the email icon. He could write to the chief of police tonight, file a formal complaint. But something held him back. This required more thought, more strategy. This wasn't just about one officer or one traffic stop. Instead, he opened a new document and began typing. Not a complaint, but a plan. It was after midnight when he finally closed the laptop and headed to bed. The next morning, Anthony woke earlier than usual. Karen was still asleep beside him, her breathing deep and steady. He slipped out of bed quietly and dressed in his running clothes, an old habit he'd maintained since law school, though his pace had slowed over the years. The neighborhood was quiet at 6 a.m., just a few other early risers out walking dogs or retrieving newspapers. Anthony nodded to Mrs. Chen watering her flower beds and to Mr. Washington, walking his golden retriever. The routine felt strangely normal after the previous night's events. 3 miles later, sweaty and somewhat clearer in his thinking, Anthony returned home. Karen was in the kitchen making coffee, already dressed for her job as the hospital's head pharmacist. You're up early, she said, handing him a glass of water. Couldn't sleep. He took a long drink. I'm going to file the complaint today. Karen nodded. Good, what else? She knew him too well. I've been thinking about starting a program, something to address the broader issues. Maybe bring together law enforcement, judges, community members, like those coffee with a cop events. Anthony shook his head. Something more substantial. Structured dialogue, policy reviews, community input. Using my position to create real change. Karen smiled. The first real smile since he'd come home the night before. That sounds like the man I married. After showering and dressing, choosing his most formal suit and his favorite tie, a gift from his older son, Anthony headed to the courthouse earlier than usual. He needed time before the day's proceedings to set his plan in motion. His judicial assistant, Lena, was already at her desk when he arrived, sorting through the day's files. Morning, Judge, she said, then looked up and studied his face. Everything okay? For a moment, Anthony considered giving his standard fine response. But Lena had been with him for 15 years. She deserved better. Not really. I had an encounter with the police last night that I need to address. Concern crossed her face. What happened? He gave her the abbreviated version as they walked into his chambers. When he finished, her expression was a mixture of anger and resignation that mirrored his own feelings. I'm going to file a complaint, he told her, And I need you to clear some time on my calendar for the next few weeks. I want to start a community dialogue program. Lena nodded. I'll make it happen. But first you should know that you're trending on social media. What? Anthony rarely checked social media, a luxury afforded by his position and age. Lena handed him her tablet. On the screen was a video clearly taken by one of the bystanders the night before. The quality wasn't great, but it clearly showed him standing beside his car, the two officers in front of him. The video had thousands of shares and comments already. The local news picked it up this morning, Lena added. They've been trying to reach you for comment. Anthony set the tablet down, a new weight settling on his shoulders. What had been a personal indignity was now a public incident. This changed things. His desk phone rang. Lena answered it, then covered the receiver with her hand. It's Chief Dixon from the police department. Anthony took a deep breath and nodded for her to put the call through. Chief Dixon, he said after picking up the receiver. I was planning to contact your office today. The chief's voice was carefully neutral. Judge Wilson, I've been made aware of an incident last night involving one of our officers. I wanted to reach out personally before this goes any further. I appreciate that, Anthony said, matching the chief's professional tone, but this is something that requires formal attention. I agree completely. That's why I'd like to meet with you today if possible. This is a serious matter that I want to address immediately. Anthony considered the request. Chief Dixon was relatively new to the position, a career officer who'd worked his way up and was known for being fair but protective of his department. Meeting with him could be productive, or it could be an attempt to smooth things over quietly. I have court until 4 today, Anthony said. I could meet after that. 4:30 at my office works for me, the chief replied, a note of relief in his voice. And Judge Wilson, for what it's worth, I'm sorry this happened. Anthony wasn't ready to accept apologies yet. We'll talk at 4:30, Chief. As he hung up, his cell phone buzzed with a text. It was from Dr. Thompson. Just saw the video. Let me know how I can help. Before Anthony could respond, Lena appeared at his door again. The president of the Black Lawyers Association is online too, and the mayor's office called asking if you'll be at the community forum tonight. Anthony hadn't planned to attend the forum, ACU's monthly event where city officials answered questions from residents, but now he reconsidered. This was rapidly becoming more than just a personal issue or even a complaint against one officer. This was becoming a moment, and moments like these required careful handling. Tell the mayor's office I'll be there, he decided, and put the BLA president through. As he reached for the phone, Anthony knew the path ahead had just become more complex. What had started as a routine drive home had escalated into something with the potential to affect far more than just his life or Officer Brennan's career. The weight of responsibility settled on his shoulders, not just as a judge sworn to uphold the law, but as a man in a position to perhaps change how the law was applied. The phone rang in his hand. It was time to begin. The courthouse hallways buzzed with unusual energy that morning. Anthony noticed the whispers and glances as he walked to his courtroom, the conversations that paused when he approached, then resumed after he passed. News traveled fast in the legal community. His morning docket was routine, mostly case management conferences and a few motions hearings. Anthony focused on each matter with his typical thoroughness, but part of his mind remained on the afternoon's meeting with Chief Dixon and the evening community forum. During the lunch recess, he closed his chamber door and made 2 important calls, first to his older son Michael in Chicago, then to his younger son Thomas in D.C. Both conversations followed similar patterns: initial concern for his well-being, followed by anger at the situation, and finally strategic discussion about next steps. Both sons wanted to come home immediately. Anthony assured them it wasn't necessary. I'm handling it, he told Thomas. Focus on your finals. We'll talk more this weekend. After hanging up, Anthony turned to the complaint form he'd pulled up on his computer. The police department's official process for filing grievances against officers was straightforward, but limited in scope. It asked for basic information: date, time, officer involved, nature of complaint, but provided little room for context or nuance. Anthony began filling it out anyway, knowing it was just one piece of a larger strategy. A soft knock on his door interrupted his typing. It was Lena. Judge Wilson, I've adjusted your calendar as requested, and Judge Patterson asked if you have a moment. Robert Patterson was the chief judge of their circuit, a fair-minded man in his 60s who had been on the bench for over 20 years. Anthony had expected this conversation would come. "I'll go see him now," Anthony said, saving his work. Judge Patterson's chambers were larger than Anthony's, with a small conference table in addition to his desk. The older judge motioned for Anthony to sit at the table rather than in front of the desk, a colleague, not a subordinate. "I saw the video," Patterson said without preamble. "Troubling business," Anthony nodded. "Yes, it is. The police chief called me this morning. He's concerned about potential fallout. Wanted to know if you were reasonable." Patterson made air quotes around the last word. "And what did you tell him?" "That you're one of the most reasonable people I know, which is precisely why he should be concerned." Patterson leaned forward. "What are you planning, Anthony?" It was rare for the chief judge to use his first name at the courthouse. Anthony recognized it as both a sign of support and a request for candor. "I'm filing the formal complaint this afternoon before I meet with Dixon. Beyond that, I'm working on a proposal for a community police dialogue program, something structured and ongoing, not just a reaction to this one incident." Patterson nodded slowly. "That's good, measured, constructive." He paused. "The mayor called me too. He's worried about how this will play at tonight's forum." "I imagine he is," Anthony replied, unable to keep a hint of dryness from his tone. "The mayor was up for re-election in 6 months. He asked if I would counsel you to take a moderate approach." Again the air quotes. "And?" "I told him you don't need counseling from me or anyone else on matters of principle." Patterson smiled slightly. "But as your colleague and friend, I will say this. You're in a unique position, Anthony. Few people have both the moral authority and the institutional standing to make real change here. Don't waste that opportunity on justified but ultimately unproductive anger." Anthony considered this. "I'm angry, Robert. I won't pretend I'm not. Of course you are. You should be. But I've watched you in court for years. You've never let anger drive your decisions, even when dealing with the worst offenders. Don't start now." The afternoon session of court seemed to drag on endlessly. Anthony maintained his judicial demeanor through 3 probation violation hearings and a contentious child custody matter. But his mind kept returning to the approaching meeting with Chief Dixon. At precisely 4 o'clock, he adjourned court and returned to his chambers. He changed his tie, a small ritual that helped him mentally transition from one important encounter to another. The blue tie he'd worn all day was replaced with a deep burgundy one that Karen had given him for their anniversary. It was perhaps a small thing, but it helped center him. He finished the complaint form, printing and signing 2 copies, one to hand to the chief, one to keep for his records. Then he reviewed his notes for the community dialogue program he envisioned. The core concept was simple but potentially powerful. Regular structured meetings between judges, police officers, and community members to discuss issues, review incidents, and develop better practices. Not just talk, but action. At 4:20, he gathered his materials and told Lena he was heading to the police department. "The press is waiting outside the building," she warned. "Someone must have tipped them off about your meeting with the chief." Anthony nodded. "I expected as much. What should I tell them if they call?" "Tell them I'll make a statement after tonight's community forum." The police headquarters was only 2 blocks from the courthouse, but Anthony drove, knowing the media would follow. He wasn't ready to answer questions yet, not until after his meeting with Chief Dixon. As expected, several reporters called out to him as he walked from his car to the building entrance. He acknowledged them with a nod but kept walking. This wasn't the time or place for that conversation. The department lobby was busy with the usual afternoon activity. Officers changing shifts, civilians coming in to file reports or pay tickets. A desk sergeant recognized him immediately and made a call. Within moments, a lieutenant appeared to escort him to the chief's office. Chief Dixon was waiting by his office door. He was a tall man with salt and pepper hair cut close to his scalp, and the erect posture of someone who had spent decades in uniform. His handshake was firm, his expression carefully neutral. "Judge Wilson, thank you for coming." The chief's office was what Anthony expected, professional, organized, with various commendations and photographs on the walls. A large map of the city hung behind the desk, marked with colored pins that presumably indicated something significant to police. Operations. They sat at a small conference table rather than across the desk from each other. The same approach Judge Patterson had taken earlier. Anthony recognized it as a small but meaningful attempt to establish an atmosphere of equality. "I've reviewed the body cam footage from last night," Chief Dixon began. "I've also spoken with both officers involved." Anthony said nothing, waiting. "Before we go further, I want to say personally and officially that what happened was unacceptable. Officer Brennan violated multiple departmental policies regarding traffic stops and identification procedures." Anthony placed the complaint form on the table between them. "I've completed your department's official complaint process." The chief glanced at the document but didn't pick it up. "I understand. You have every right to file that complaint, and it will be processed according to our protocols." He paused. "But I'm hoping we might be able to address this situation more comprehensively." "What did you have in mind?" Anthony asked, his tone carefully neutral. "Officer Brennan has been placed on administrative duty pending a full investigation. Sergeant Clark has received a formal reprimand for failing to properly supervise a junior officer." Dixon leaned forward slightly. "But I recognize that individual discipline, while necessary, doesn't address the underlying issues." This was more than Anthony had expected. He had anticipated defensiveness or attempts to minimize what had happened. The chief's approach suggested an openness that might align with his own goals. "I agree," Anthony said. "That's why I've been working on a proposal for a community police dialogue program." He slid the outline across the table. "Something structured and ongoing, not just a reaction to this incident." Dixon reviewed the document, nodding slowly as he read. "This is thoughtful, more substantive than what we've tried before." "It needs to be," Anthony said. "Coffee with a cop events and community basketball games are fine for building general goodwill, but they don't address the specific issues that lead to incidents like what happened last night." "You're proposing that you would lead this effort?" "Co-lead," Anthony corrected. "Along with you are your designee and a respected community member. Tripartite leadership, judiciary, law enforcement, and community." Dixon set the paper down. "I appreciate this approach, Judge Wilson, truly. But I have to ask, what happens with the video? The media is already running with this story. It could undermine everything we're trying to do here if it turns into another flashpoint." It was a fair question. Anthony had been considering it himself. "I'm going to speak at the community forum tonight," he said. "I'll acknowledge what happened, express my concerns, but also introduce this program as a path forward. No grandstanding, no inflammatory rhetoric, just honest communication about a real problem and a constructive solution." Relief showed briefly on Dixon's face. "That would be helpful." But Anthony continued, "I won't pretend this didn't happen or downplay its significance. Officer Brennan's actions were wrong, and the department needs to take visible, meaningful steps to address not just this incident, but the culture that made it possible." Dixon nodded slowly. "I understand. And I agree." He extended his hand. "I think we have the beginning of a way forward, Judge Wilson." As they shook hands, Anthony felt cautiously optimistic. This was just one conversation, and the hard work of creating real change lay ahead. But it was a start. The community forum would be the next test, facing the public, the media, and a city on edge. Anthony checked his watch as he left the police headquarters. He had 2 hours to prepare for what might be one of the most important speeches of his career. Not as a judge, but as a citizen trying to build a bridge across a divide that had existed for far too long. The community center was already packed when Anthony arrived. What normally drew 50 or 60 residents for the monthly forum had swelled to well over 300 people tonight. The room hummed with tension and anticipation. News vans lined the parking lot outside, their satellite dishes raised against the darkening sky. Anthony slipped in through a side entrance, hoping for a few moments to collect his thoughts before facing the crowd. He found a small office behind the main meeting room and sat down, reviewing his notes one last time. He'd written and rewritten his statement during the 2 hours since his meeting with Chief Dixon, weighing each word carefully. A soft knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. It was Lisa Chen, the city council president. "Judge Wilson, thank you for coming tonight," she said. "I wanted to check in with you before we begin." Anthony had worked with Lisa on several community initiatives over the years. She was smart, practical, and genuinely committed to public service. "I appreciate that," he replied. "It's quite a turnout." Lisa nodded. Everyone's talking about the video. The mayor is concerned about how this might play out. I'm sure he is. He wanted me to ask if you'd be willing to review your remarks with him. Before the forum starts, Lisa looked uncomfortable making the request. Anthony shook his head. Please tell the mayor I appreciate his interest, but what I have to say tonight needs to be my own words, not negotiated statements. Lisa seemed relieved by his response. I understand completely. For what it's worth, I'm glad you're here tonight. People respect you. They'll listen. I hope so, Anthony said, though he knew the situation was more complicated than that. Respect didn't automatically translate to agreement or acceptance, especially when addressing issues as complex and emotional as those they faced tonight. The main room was arranged with a long table at the front for city officials and rows of chairs for residents. As Anthony entered, he saw the mayor already seated at the center of the table, flanked by Lisa Chen, the city manager, and, somewhat surprisingly, Chief Dixon. The chief hadn't mentioned he would be attending. Anthony took his assigned seat at the end of the table. From this position, he could see the faces of many in the audience. The crowd was diverse, young and old, various races and backgrounds, some in business attire, others in work uniforms or casual clothes. He recognized many from his courtroom over the years. Attorneys, witnesses, jurors, even some former defendants. Near the front sat Dr. Thompson, who gave him an encouraging nod. A few rows back, Anthony spotted Karen, who had come directly from her shift at the hospital. Her presence strengthened his resolve. At precisely 7 o'clock, Lisa Chen called the meeting to order. She began with the usual announcements and updates, but quickly acknowledged the elephant in the room. Many of you are here tonight because of an incident that occurred in our community yesterday evening, involving one of our most respected citizens, Judge Anthony Wilson, and members of our police department. That incident was captured on video and has raised important questions about policing practices in our city. A murmur ran through the crowd. Lisa continued, We have modified our usual format tonight to address these concerns directly. Chief Dixon will speak first, followed by Judge Wilson, and then we will open the floor for community comments and questions. Chief Dixon approached the podium. He was in full uniform, his demeanor serious but not defensive. Good evening, he began. I'm here tonight to address what happened yesterday when Judge Anthony Wilson was stopped by one of our officers. He paused, looking directly at Anthony. First, I want to state clearly that the stop and subsequent treatment of Judge Wilson was inconsistent with our department policies and the standards of conduct we expect from every officer. Murmur of surprise ran through the crowd. Few had expected such a direct acknowledgement. Officer Brennan has been placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation. Dixon continued. Sergeant Clark has received a formal reprimand for failure to properly supervise, but disciplinary actions alone are insufficient. The chief detailed the immediate steps the department would take: a review of traffic stop protocols, additional training on bias-free policing, and a commitment to greater transparency. Then he mentioned something Anthony hadn't expected. Additionally, I've had productive discussions with Judge Wilson about establishing a new community police dialogue program that would bring together law enforcement, judicial representatives, and community members for ongoing structured conversations about how we police and how we can do better. This announcement drew scattered applause. Dixon concluded his remarks by addressing Anthony directly. Judge Wilson, on behalf of the police department, I apologize for what you experienced. It was unacceptable, and we are committed to ensuring it doesn't happen again. Not to you, not to anyone in our community. As Dixon returned to his seat, Anthony felt the weight of expectation settle on his shoulders. The crowd was silent as he approached the podium, all eyes on him. The speech he had prepared suddenly seemed inadequate to the moment. He set his notes aside. Thank you, Chief Dixon, for those words and commitments, he began. Last night I was driving home from work when I was stopped by a police officer who accused me of stealing my own car. He paused, letting the words hang in the air. It was not the first time I've been stopped without cause, but it was the first time it happened while I was wearing my judge's badge. Anthony recounted the incident in measured tones, neither downplaying nor dramatizing what had occurred. He described how it felt to stand on the side of the road, to be questioned about his own vehicle, to see the recognition in Sergeant Clark's eyes when he realized who Anthony was. What happened to me happens to black men and women in our community every day, He continued. The difference is that most don't have a judge's badge to change the equation. Most don't have videos that go viral. Most don't get personal apologies from the police chief. The room was completely silent now. I could stand here tonight and express my anger. It would be justified. I could demand Officer Brennan's dismissal. Many would support that. But where would that leave us? He looked around the room. With one officer gone, but the same systems, the same assumptions, the same problems intact, Anthony shifted his focus, discussing the dialogue program Chief Dixon had mentioned. What we need isn't just accountability for a single incident, but transformation of a system. The program the chief mentioned isn't just about talking. It's about listening, learning, and then, most importantly, changing how we do things. He outlined the structure: monthly meetings, rotating locations throughout the city, concrete action items after each session, public progress reports, not just police and community leaders, but patrol officers, residents from every neighborhood, young people, seniors, business owners, faith leaders. This won't be easy, Anthony acknowledged. We'll have uncomfortable conversations. We'll disagree. We'll make mistakes. But if we commit to this process with honesty and good faith, we can create something meaningful together. As he spoke, Anthony could see the skepticism on some faces begin to soften. Though certainly not on all, change would not come from one speech or one program. It would take time, persistence, and courage from everyone involved. I'm not here seeking justice just for myself, he concluded. I'm seeking justice for our community. All of our community. That means accountability, yes, but also healing and progress. I believe we can do this work together. I believe we must. The applause that followed was not thunderous, but it was genuine. As Anthony returned to his seat, he caught Karen's eye. She gave him a small smile and a nod of approval. The open forum that followed was passionate but largely respectful. Residents shared their own experiences with police, asked hard questions of the chief, and offered suggestions for the dialogue program. Anthony listened carefully to each speaker, noting ideas to incorporate into the program framework. Near the end of the evening, a man Anthony didn't recognize approached the microphone. He was younger than most who had spoken, perhaps in his early 20s, with the wary posture of someone who expected to be dismissed. I just want to know one thing, he said, addressing both Anthony and Chief Dixon. A year from now, how will we know if anything has really changed? Not just talk, not just meetings, but real change we can see and feel in our neighborhoods. It was the most important question of the night. Anthony and the chief exchanged glances. Dixon nodded slightly, deferring to Anthony to answer. That's exactly the right question, Anthony said.
Here's my commitment. In 1 year, we'll hold a special forum to assess our progress.
We'll look at specific metrics, traffic stop data broken down by race and neighborhood, complaint statistics, community feedback surveys. But numbers only tell part of the story. The real measure will be in the experiences people have day to day and whether trust has begun to be restored. He paused, then added, and I'm putting my reputation on the line with this program. If we haven't made measurable progress in a year, I'll be the first to say we need a different approach. As the forum wound down, reporters clustered near the front of the room, eager for interviews. Anthony spoke briefly with several local outlets, repeating the main points from his speech and emphasizing the forward-looking aspects of the program. It was nearly 11 when he finally walked out to the parking lot with Karen. The night air felt cool after the stuffy meeting room. How do you think it went? He asked her as they reached their cars. You did well, she said. But this is just the beginning. Anthony nodded, knowing she was right. The real work lay ahead, turning words into action, promises into change. It would be challenging, often frustrating, and progress would come slowly. But for the first time since the traffic stop, he felt something close to hope. As they drove home separately, Karen from the community center, Anthony from the courthouse where he'd left his car, he thought about that young man's question. A year from now, what would be different? The answer would depend not just on him or Chief Dixon or the mayor, but on whether an entire community could find the courage to face difficult truths and the wisdom to move forward together. The road ahead would not be easy, but it was a road worth taking.